Welcome, and thank you for joining this Zoom for a discussion of building capacity for your organizations, your projects, and community. My name is Melanie Schlotterbeck, and I'll be moderating this session today for Friends of Harbors, Beaches, and Parks. You see that we're in webinar format on the Zoom platform, which means the icons at the bottom of the screen may look a little different than you normally see. Today's content is being live simulcast into Spanish, and now our interpreter will translate this introduction before being moved into the Spanish audio channel.
Bienvenidos, gracias por conectarse y participar en este Zoom para una discusión sobre cómo desarrollar capacidades para sus organizaciones, proyectos y comunidad. Mi nombre es Melanie Schlotterbeck y hoy moderaré esta sesión para amigos de puertos, playas y parques. Verá que estamos en formato de seminario web en la plataforma Zoom. Esto significa que los iconos en la parte inferior pueden ser un poco diferentes de lo que normalmente ve. El contenido de hoy se va a transmitir en vivo simultáneamente en español y yo, la intérprete Mercedes Marló, voy a estar interpretando una vez que me pasen al canal de audio en español simultáneamente.
Every slide has yellow text to match the English version of content.
Cada diapositiva tiene texto amarillo para que coincida con la versión en inglés del contenido.
And should you need interpretation services, please click on the globe icon and select Spanish.
Si necesitas servicios de interpretación, puedes hacer clic en el icono del globo terráqueo y puedes seleccionar español.
Should you need assistance with closed captioning, that is offered as well. Simply click the Show Captions icon. During today's presentation, we will be accepting questions via the Q&A icon. If you click it, you have the option to ask a question by typing into the box and selecting to be anonymous or not, and then clicking the send arrow on the bottom right. Finally, limited interactions will occur during the Zoom in the chat, as it is only being used to pass information into the hands of our participants. If you need to send something other than a question to us, click on the chat icon and type your message and click send. This event is being recorded and posted to the Friends of Harbors, Beaches, and Parks YouTube channel. If you miss any portion, need to see something again, or registered but couldn't make it, this entire workshop will be available online. And now that we've had the basics out of the way, let me acknowledge there are, in the state of California, on occupied territory, over 110 federally recognized or over 70 non-federally recognized tribes. These lands have been stewarded by Native nations since time immemorial. These lands and waters have significance to the indigenous people of California. Friends of Harbors, Beaches, and Parks work is focused on the ancestral homelands of the Acjachemen, Juaneño, and Tongva, Gabrielino people. We pay respect to the indigenous people whose land was forcibly colonized and recognize the importance of the tribal relationship to the land, past, present, and future. Actions you can take to curb cultural erasure include reading about local tribes, donating to tribally led organizations, and engaging with tribes in your work. Today's workshop is brought to you by the nonprofit Friends of Harbors, Beaches, and Parks, or FHBP for short, and we work to protect the natural lands, waterways, and beaches of Orange County, California. We are grateful for the grant funding that allows these workshops to be made available. The FHBP team working on this webinar includes myself as the panel moderator. We also have Mercedes Merlot, our interpreter, and Giovanni DeFranco, who is staffing the chat and Q&A. This series is in partnership with the statewide Power in Nature Coalition, which coordinates the grassroots effort for 30 by 30. If you've not heard of 30 by 30, I'd be surprised, but let me give you a little primer. Governor Newsom signed Executive Order N82-20, which set the goal to protect 30% of California's lands and waters by 2030. It's shortened to 30 by 30, and this isn't just a California effort. It's a local, state, national, and international effort. The agency responsible for overseeing the implementation of 30 by 30 is the California Natural Resources Agency, or CNRA. There are 3 pillars to 30 by 30, which includes biodiversity, access to nature, and climate resilience. And I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that Senator Min ran AB 337, which codifies 30 by 30, and it was signed by the governor earlier this month. So now it is state law to hit 30 by 30. California Natural Resources Agency released on Earth Day, April 22nd last year, a document called Pathways to 30 by 30, which identified 10 different strategies on how we will achieve 30 by 30. Today, we are grateful to have with us 3 exceptional speakers, including Shannon Lucas. She has been a senior environmental scientist supervisor at the Wildlife Conservation Board for over 2 years. She oversees restoration and development programs, including stream flow enhancement, riparian habitat conservation, desert conservation, and public access. Prior to working for WCB, she spent over 8 years in the California Department of Fish and Wildlife's Landscape Conservation Planning Program as the statewide coordinator for the Natural Community Conservation Planning Program, and assisted with the coordination of the Regional Conservation Investment Strategy Program. We also have Karen Buck, who's the Vice President of Conservation Impact, an organizational development firm that works with conservation leaders to build stronger, more sustainable organizations. She has worked with land and water conservation groups and agencies across the country, from small community-based groups to large national organizations. And she helps her clients make strategic decisions, develop useful plans and tools, and build skills to grow, thrive, and effectively manage change. Juan Rosas is dedicated conservation program manager at the Hispanic Access Foundation with a career spanning 17 years. He not only has founded and directed multiple nonprofits in Southern California, but has also become a driving force in advocating for essential human rights, fueled by an unyielding belief that every individual should have access to fundamental necessities like housing, food, healthcare, education, and recreational spaces. Juan has devoted his life to effecting positive change. And I'm just going to give a shout out to Juan. He and I serve on the 30 by 30 Partnership Coordinating Council together, and he's been an effective leader there as well. So we're delighted to have these 3 presenters with us today. The presentation topics are listed on your screen. They have about 12 minutes each to cover their material, and then we'll answer a few questions afterwards. We encourage you to add your questions into the Q&A so that we can track them there. We've scheduled plenty of time at the end for Q&A as well, so don't be disheartened if your question isn't answered immediately. First up is Shannon explaining that the Wildlife Conservation Board grant programs and more. Shannon, take it away.
Thank you, Melanie. Good morning, everyone. Great to be here. Yeah, my name is Shannon Lucas, and I'm a restoration supervisor here with the Wildlife Conservation Board. Let's see. So I did it. Okay. So the Wildlife Conservation Board is a state agency under the California Natural Resources Agency, and it's been around since 1947. WCB works closely with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, but we are actually a separate entity from CDFW. A lot of people get confused with that. Our mission is to protect and restore habitat for wildlife and humans. And we do this by giving and managing grants to government entities, tribes, and nonprofits. And our current focus is on projects that increase biodiversity, habitat connectivity, climate resilience, and equity. So WCB has 17 different programs, and those, for example, some of those include the Desert Conservation Program, Stream Flow Enhancement Program, the Public Access Program. There's a lot. We fund 3 types of projects: land acquisition, which can include a fee title or conservation easements, restoration, habitat restoration projects, and wildlife-oriented public access projects. Our funding generally comes from bonds such as Proposition 68, but in the last few years, we've gotten a large amount of money from the general fund as well. And each fund source has its own requirements and restrictions. So one way that WCB can fund capacity building for grantee organizations is through our restoration and public access projects. Those projects can either be for planning, like design and permitting, or the actual physical on-the-ground implementation of those projects. And a typical project can include costs for capacity building as needed to accomplish the project, such as paying for staff time or paying to hire new staff. Unfortunately, the funds are only good for the term of the grant, which is generally around 5 years. So any capacity that was built during that time would then need to be funded under an alternate source after that. WCB has also funded several block grants, which have built capacity for the grantee, as well as built capacity for more projects and partners. These block grants allow for many smaller projects to be funded, which collectively lead to large outcomes. WCB does not have the capacity for managing many small grants, which is why we give a block grant to an organization and then they can give out smaller grants. These block grants also allow for access and support for less traditional or historically underserved applicant groups. Some examples of ones we've recently funded are the Building Wildlife Friendly Resilience in Working Landscapes. It's for habitat restoration projects, and they have a target for 50% of the funding going to tribes, disadvantaged communities, and historically underserved people. The Climate Smart Meadow Restoration Block Grant also is for habitat restoration for 6,000 acres of meadows and planning for additional 6,000 acres. And the Climate Resilience through Habitat Restoration Grant Block Grant, it's through the California Association of Resource Conservation Districts, and it goes to local resource conservation districts for habitat restoration projects. At WCB, we're also currently reviewing 2 applications from organizations that would provide technical assistance to applicants in the preparation and management of grants. And those are intended to help serve more underrepresented applicant groups. Am I on the right slide here? Uh-oh, did I screw up?
I see capacity building. Now I see how to apply.
Okay, I don't, but okay. How to apply. So we have a continuously open grant application process, so people can apply whenever they want. We do encourage pre-consultation. We really encourage people to call us and just talk to us about their projects to see if it's a good fit or not, or how competitive it might be. So call us anytime. We have a pre-application and a full application. So we ask people to first submit a pre-application. It's brief, it's meant to be short and sweet. And then if that gets scored well, we would invite a full application, which of course is much longer and detailed. And if that scores well, it may be recommended to our board for approval. Something to keep in mind when applying to us is our board only meets 4 times a year. So February, May, August, and November. And so we really encourage people to try to apply at least 6 months before the board meeting they would maybe be considering. So in other words, you can't submit your application today and expect to get on the November agenda, or maybe even the February agenda. So that's something to keep in mind. And that's all I have. I definitely welcome lots of questions from you guys about our programs and our process, but here's my contact information.
Great, Shannon, thank you. The Wildlife Conservation Board's just been instrumental in getting lands acquired and restored, and we appreciate all the hard work that you and your team at WCB have done, so thank you. We do have a question that has come in. The capacity grants, this is specific to them. So are those only awarded via block grants?
You know, this is still a really new territory for us. So no, I don't believe they would have to be through a block grant. That's just what we have done so far. But like I said, we're really open to talking to people about their projects. And so I would welcome a phone call at any time just to discuss what it is you maybe have in mind. But our general fund money the last few years has allowed us a lot of flexibility with what we can do. And so that's why this is kind of new territory for us. Traditionally, WCB did not fund anything that was sort of out of the box besides acquisition and restoration and, you know, on the ground projects.
So a follow-up question to that then, is there a general rule of thumb that WCB uses as to how much a block grant is?
Great question. The 3 that we've funded so far, I'm trying to remember, but I think they've been anywhere from the $10 to $20 million range. And it really just depends on the scope of what's being proposed. I mean, we have had a few applications for block grants that asked for that much, and based on what they were trying to do, we said, no, you really should aim for more like 5 million. So it's a conversation. You know, we really encourage that dialogue and the development of projects with applicants.
Excellent. Kent has a question on the dollar limit for acquisitions. Does WCB have a max, or maybe
No.
in?
We don't have a max, but you know, we do. While we have a lot of money right now, you know, we obviously want to make sure our money goes to a variety of projects throughout the state. And so, no, we don't technically have a max, but obviously there are certain projects that we have to weigh the benefits for how much it's costing. So, I mean, we've definitely had acquisitions, you know, that we've spent over 20 million on, but you know, that would have to be like a super important, highly critical piece of habitat. You know, it just depends on the property.
So a follow-up question to that I have, just because I think it's really relevant to what you said. I know that WCB just had a policy change about appraisals and needing an independent review. Can you explain a little bit of information about that?
No. Well, that's a short answer. So we have a separate team that does land acquisitions. I'm on the restoration and development team. However, our policy is, I believe, was posted on our webpage, but I believe it had to do with the limits. Like if an appraisal was up to a certain amount, you know, we had to get an independent appraisal, but I'm sorry, I can't answer that.
Okay, so I'll add a little bit of info that I have. So the number used to be $5 million that you then had to get an independent appraisal on, and now it matches what the Department of General Services requires, which is 15 million. So anything below 15 million does not need a second appraisal done independently through WCB. So, and apparently we can find that policy on your website. So thank you for pointing that out. Another question, this is really interesting based on kind of the task ahead with 30 by 30, is has the staffing actually kept up with this extra funding?
Wow, great question. We were lucky enough to get a few extra positions. When was that? 2 years ago. And so that's really helped us to keep up. However, you know, we do have a lot of money to spend, and we do have a ton of applications coming in. And so that's another factor that we consider when we're scoring an application is this a critical enough project that warrants staff time, because our staff time is already, you know, pretty full. And so that's one thing that we have to consider is this project important enough to add to our staff's workload? And sometimes it doesn't make the cut.
Got it. We'll do one more question and then we'll move on to our next presentation. So the next question is from Andrea Gullo, whom I'm pretty sure you know. Does WCB offer long-term maintenance funds on a restoration site if there is a requirement of WCB to keep it weed-free?
You know, we get this a lot. We know that there's a huge need for long-term maintenance funding, and unfortunately, no, we can't. I wish that answer were different, and maybe sometime in the future. It really has to do with the restrictions of our fund source, and our funds are only good through a certain period of time. Like our general fund money right now is only good through June 2028. We have no ability to extend that. That is from the legislature. So would love to be able to do that someday though.
Well,
But
we'll have to
so
put
keep,
some creative minds to it then.
yeah, but keep in mind, so yeah, but you do make a good point about the maintenance, you know, let's say our grant is 5 years, but we also usually have a grant life of 20 to 25 years in which the grantee needs to maintain the conditions that they have restored it to. And yeah, it can be challenging to find money during that time period. So that's something to keep in mind if you want a grant from us, is do you have the resources to maintain it for that whole 20 to 25 year grant life.
Excellent. I do know that we have another question in, but we're going to go ahead and answer that at the end of the session today. And we'll move over to Karen, who's going to be talking to us about improving our organizational capacity. And I know this is top of mind for a lot of groups in Southern California. Well, and statewide and probably nationally, but because our focus is down here in the south part of the state, we're looking forward to hearing what you have to say, Karen.
All right. Thanks, everyone. I'm really excited to be here today because, you know, Melanie, you are right. This opportunity 30/30, I hear it called once in a lifetime funding, all these funding streams coming in. It's a really exciting time. And you know, it's generative, it's kind of juicy, it gets people thinking in ways that maybe they haven't been able to think of before, because it's really hard not to let like your resources kind of constrain your thinking, right? So new resources and people are thinking bigger and that opportunity to make an impact. And that's why everyone here is doing the work that they do, right? It's not for, you know, the huge cash prizes that we get personally or anything like that. So and you all are people who manage and lead organizations, maybe as staff, maybe as volunteers. And I'm not here to pop the bubble of that excitement, but I am here to bring in a way to think about the larger reality in which you operate, right? Because these are some big, hey, I got a 20 million grant to conserve X, that might be huge. But your mission probably isn't to get and administer a grant from Shannon's organization, right? Your mission is something broader. So we need to, if we want to build capacity in a sustainable way, we need to understand yourself and this opportunity in that larger context. I'm with a company called Conservation Impact. We work out of Denver, Colorado, but we work all over the country. We've been doing this kind of work for 26 years, and we work with groups like yours when they're at these transition points, right? And when they want to look organization wide and say, what does this mean for us? How do we make an impact? And how do we also build and ensure we've got a strong organization? Sometimes that's when folks are starting up, but sometimes it's times like this where there's all of these opportunities and you want to grab after them, but you want to do it in a way that doesn't, I don't know, burn out your staff, right? Or set yourself up for 20 years of stewardship costs that you didn't think about ahead of time. So we want to get to this larger context and think about these opportunities in that way and do the work on the front end that saves you on the back end, right? Because anytime there's new money, people start talking about sustainability. So here's what I want you to walk away from this section with. I want to give you a way to think about these funding opportunities and these new projects and sustainability kind of in that broader context of your whole organization. I'm going to give you some steps you can use to identify the capacity that you're going to need to successfully engage and do this work that you're considering taking on. And then also kind of give you my little down and dirty 3 strategic rather sustainability planning kind of questions that I use to guide organizations thinking through this, that I think provide a nice starting point for thinking about the impact of this for your organization. So I'm going to start by looking at that sustainability. And sometimes, less now, but sometimes people just think about money when they think about sustainability. It's much more helpful and realistic to think of it more holistically. So I'll give you a second to look at this definition, but it's got a little consultant jargon in it, so I'll break that down. So having all the resources you need to achieve results towards mission, basically to make the impact you exist to make, right? Whatever your mission is, whatever your strategic goals are, and to carry out the core function, and to do the work that's necessary to meet those goals on an ongoing basis. And I want you to look at that last clause, independent of any one individual or source of funding, right? So, and Shannon just told us right now, like this grant period is through 5 years. And if you want to continue something through 5 years, what's the plan, right? So we want to think beyond this in time and also beyond this effort into our larger context of our mission. What I like about this definition too, is we can get so caught up in the resources that we need that we put things in the wrong order. And this puts your mission and the impact you want to have for your community and for your environment at the heart of it. Because all those resources are just a means to the end, right? So this definition also helps us keep in mind why we're really here, because sometimes it can be really nerve-wracking to deal with the resource and the capacity questions. The other thing I said I wanted you to have a way to think about this in the broader context is I want you to be able to think about your organization as a whole. So your organization as a system or an ecosystem, right? Because this is really what our organization is. So I'm going to walk you some questions to think about either this funding or the projects, the work you might take on in the context of your organizational system as a whole, right? Your organization is a system like an ecosystem. So a change in one place creates ripple effects and changes all throughout the system, large and small, right? So a big chunk of funding coming in, whole bunch of new staff coming in. It's not that that's not a great addition, but it's going to have all these ripple effects, right? So we need to understand ourselves as a system, be able to track these ripple effects down to make sure that we're staying aligned around who we are and how we're moving forward. Shannon, you actually just gave us a great example. People always underestimate what it takes to spend big pots of money and to do it responsibly. And you know how common it is to say, here's the money. Oh, new staffing? No new staffing, right? So I'm glad you got that staffing. I wish you had more of that. I hope more of that for the future. But that's an example of there being alignment as that change happens. Quite often there's not alignment around these things. So if we think about our sustainability holistically, we think about our organization as a system, then we can start kind of getting into, there we go. These are the questions I want you to use to start to understand how will this fit into our organizational system, okay? So first, as you think about this project or the capacity building you want to do, either it's going to be similar to work you already do, so it's a pine tree in our little mountain ecosystem, or it might be a totally different type of work. Maybe you're a policy group and now you're going to start doing some restoration work. I don't know, right? So that might be a palm tree versus the policy group that's going to do more advocacy work, right? So first, is it expanding work we already do? Or is it really going to be a different type of work we're doing? Then you also want to think about the scale. Is this a small addition or is this the $20 million grant, right? How big is this? And then how does this fit into your current plans of your organization? If you have a current strategic plan or a set of organization-wide goals of some kind, I would start there. And I would look at the goals and the impact you're going to have through this new funding or this new project. And then look at my goals and say, how does this fit? Is this moving me forward more quickly in an area? Is this adding a new goal? If so, am I pulling back on something else? We need to get this aligned at this high level first. An example, land trusts during the pandemic, many of them had to reprioritize their goals because there was a huge spike in people using public access areas. So people had to look at things, say, we can't do maybe all the acquisition we want to do right now because we have to devote more to stewardship and management of the public access land. They weren't saying we're never going to do acquisition, but they're saying we're going to do that in year 4 instead of in year 1. So it might be a change in sequencing. Another thing to look at over this piece is your core partnerships, your most important partnerships, and how will adding this in impact work you have with partners. So much conservation depends on working within a network. And if you're going to shift and move resources to a different area, it could have those kind of ripple effects. As you think this through, I would document it and I would share that around your organization. You want people, even if they're in a program area that's not relevant, if they're on a different board committee, whatever, everyone needs to know if this is sort of changing things at that level. Then we get into the specifics, right? So first, what's the overall effect? How am I going to change and update kind of my goals, my organization-wide pieces? And now specifically, what's the capacity I need to be successful, right? Staffing, facilities, systems, equipment, these types of things. Here in particular, when you're thinking about staffing, think about, are the people I'm going to bring on 100% for this project, or are they coming in and they're going to work on other things as well? I know Juan's going to talk about community engagement here in a moment. If you're going to start doing more work there, you might bring people in who've got new skill sets. Where else do you want to use those skill sets in your organization, right? So thinking about things in that way. And especially as you're thinking about staffing, you know, this is a place where you can really reach out to others in your field to see how they're staffing things. What are the job descriptions, the onboarding techniques? Because hiring right now is really hard. It's going to be for a while. It's really competitive. My best piece of advice here is do not write unicorn job descriptions. Do not say we're going to have someone do 20% this and 80% that, and these things that don't go together, right? Differing skill sets, like, you know, create job descriptions that have some cohesion to them. But if you're starting with your goals and how it affects you, then you can get down to, okay, we need this number of staff. You can get really specific here. And then when you're drafting your grant for Shannon, right, you can build that in, and you can also explain to her how this acquisition piece fits into our overall, you know, regional conservation strategy, which is probably going to make it a stronger proposal. Just saying. Other impacts on your capacity that often get overlooked. Management. If you were going to build, I don't know, you're a 6-person organization, you're going to add 3 people. Who is going to supervise those people? What then has to come off that person's plate so those people can be properly supervised? And who's going to do that other work, right? So what is the managerial capacity that's needed? Also, impacts on culture. If you're doing a really different kind of work, people come in with different skill sets, different frames of reference, right? How are we going to bring people together, have a cohesive culture, right? Or if you're just really growing quickly, maybe you can't all sit around the table anymore. So how do you keep people connected, right? So thinking about our culture, how do we want it to feel to be here? How do we want to work together? And also, you know, opportunity costs. Basically, what are the things that we're not going to be able to do because we're moving in this direction? And just understanding that, being honest about it, and thinking it through ahead of time. Lastly, just wrapping up here, my 3 down and dirty questions when I'm thinking about sustainability. First, I'm thinking, what specifically are we trying to sustain long term? Then I'm doing the math. What is it going to cost to sustain that? Then I can start doing research, talking to people. Where are there opportunities to raise that money? I can do those things. That first question sounds really simple, but it's actually a bit more complicated, right? So what are we really trying to sustain? Is it a staff position? Is it the stewardship capacity for that restoration work? Is it the ability to maintain the community engagement, the new constituencies we've built over the last 5 years, right? Get specific on what it is. Is it ability? Is it a skill set? Is an FTE? Exactly what do you need to sustain in the context of your overall organization? Then you can cost it out. Then you can start finding out who else cares about that value. Who else could you connect around this work, and start moving in that direction and cultivating those sources now. But the time to start that thinking is as soon as you can, basically. Lastly, if you're looking to build your capacity, these are kind of the keys to success. You've got to be meeting a real need. You know, if you're not, get out of the way for folks who are, right? You've got to understand these ripple effects and align yourself. Otherwise, you're just like slapping an addition onto your house without the permit, and it's just not going to work out in the long term. So really understand how it fits in. Make sure you're aligning things, and then think past the funding and get clear on what it is you want to have day one after the funding expires, where you want to be, what you want your organization to be doing, and who you need to have at the table. I think Giovanni put in chat a couple of links. One of those brings you to a place on my website. We do 3 free 30-minute phone consultations. So if you want to talk about your specific situation, fill that form out, let me know, and we'll find a time to talk. I'm happy to find some tools or specific pieces that might be more particular to your situation. The other link is to a booklet we have if you want to read a little bit more about this idea of your organization as a system and how to keep things aligned. That booklet, the integrated strategy model, is a good starting place for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. I know that with this influx of money, top of mind is capacity. And so this was a really timely presentation, and I appreciate the insights and your decades of experience with this topic and many others I know. But it was great information. So thank you for sharing the factors that we all need to consider when an organization is growing its capacity. And I'm going to encourage folks to submit their questions into the Q&A, but one question that's come up is whether or not groups need to kind of stagger staffing rather than, do you start everybody at full time? Is it better to start part-time and grow into it? Do you have thoughts, ideas, or recommendations on that?
Two things. I think it's very different depending on your locality. So I would talk to some other, heck, it could be your dry cleaner, it could be someone at your grocery store, but you know, if people are looking for part-time thing, you know, how are they hiring? And what does it take to be competitive to actually get an employee to say yes? Because it's definitely their market right now. Because there are definitely trends, like in rural areas, they might be more part-time because folks tend to maybe have 2 or 3 different positions they're battling together. The other thing, if you are hiring more of a team, I would bring on whoever kind of like the manager type person is first. So that person can be part of bringing on the other folks. It's going to increase your capacity right away to do some of that hiring work. And it gives them something real to jump into as they're kind of still on their learning curve. So I would fill those types of positions first.
Excellent, great recommendations. And I know that with the experience your organization has, you have a lot of resources. Do people just go to your website? Are there booklets and webinars? How do people read up on this to get more experience and understanding?
Yeah, there, if you go to our website, there is a resources page. There's a number of different booklets we've written. And then there's also our blog. I was just looking at it. We haven't put a lot of blog posts on there, but the kind of work that we do, it's like creating strategies, creating strategy. So like some of it, even if it's old, it's probably still, you know, some relevant stuff, because it's a lot of this is kind of best practice stuff, but a lot of it also comes from work in the trenches. So it also has some, the blog has more kind of like some stories and case studies that provide some nice context. The booklets in the resources section, if you need to bring like a board along with the concept, boards like those. Yeah.
Yes, boards need resources as well, not just that.
Yeah.
And that actually leads me to a question that Barbara submitted. How does your framework fit with an all volunteer organization? What might be different there?
Yeah, lots of things are different. First, if you're all volunteer, unless you're living somewhere that has a lot of retirees moving there, then you are probably seeing evidence of the national trends of the number of volunteers and the amount of time people volunteer decreasing over time. And that younger generations volunteer in different ways. It's more episodic. It's more like, I will come, I can do this for 6 months and then I can't come back, right? So I would be realistic about that. It's common that all volunteer organizations have passionate people who've been there for a long time. It can be hard to accept that the new folks coming in might want to need to work differently. So first I would say be really open to that and kind of meeting people where they are. And anything you can do cloud-based, because you know what happens when a key volunteer disappears and if things are on their hard drive, and sometimes our systems might be a little behind. But depending on the type of work you want to do, you know, it might be time to consider, you know, adding your first staff person. If so, you know, Google around that, because a lot of organizations go through that. There's a lot of good stories and kind of best practices around, like, if suddenly you have to manage a contractor for the first time or hire a staff person for the first time, that's a big change for an organization and the culture of it. But there's a lot of good tools and information out there. So if you're in that situation, don't try to figure it out on your own, because there's so many people who've been in that situation before.
That's a really good point, and that actually brought to mind, as it relates to organizational planning, the concept of succession planning.
Yes.
How does that tie into organizational capacity?
Two things. First, if you go to the resources section, I can find this link and send it to Giovanni, and maybe we can send it out during the Q&A. We've got a little workbook to kind of get yourself started with succession planning. It's like a fill in the blank sort of, just to get started with some of the basic stuff. But the other thing, honestly, long term, you know, your succession plan depends on, you know, knowing where it is you're trying to get to, right? So I would say if you don't have a clear set of strategic goals or kind of know what you want to get focused on over the next 5 years, I would start there, because that's going to then tell you what, like, the next whomever needs to focus on. Because your succession plan is never like, oh, Melanie's leaving, we have to clone Melanie. It's never exactly the same person you need, but you're going to understand the person you need if you're really clear on where you want to go. So that's the place I would start. You know, we'll get that link to Giovanni. We'll send it out during the Q&A, and that's a good place to start the actual planning process. But you're gonna get hung up in the planning process if you're not clear on, like, where your organization's going with what the focus is.
Yep, that's a really good point. So Barbara has a follow-up question. How does your organization, Conservation Impact, work with a client? What does that look like?
Yeah, we work with clients to really specific scopes of work. Most of the work we do is either strategy or business planning. Business planning is kind of strategy plus figuring out how do we organize ourselves and get started implementing. And everything we do kind of starts with first some analysis, because you don't want to just sit down and talk to yourselves about where you're going. You work with communities, you work with partners. There's big trends going on, like all this 30-30 money, right? Like, you've got to understand your situation. And then there's some kind of decisions, because any kind of planning is, what do we want to do? And so what do we not want to do, right? And so, you know, we'll work with folks, we'll bring the information to the table, help them go through the decision-making process, and then create whatever the tool is that they need for implementation. So I say business plan like there's a template I have, but there's not. I just know that what's the tool you need to implement your plan, whatever that is, and that's what your plan looks like. Yeah, but we do things really customized in that way, and scaled to what folks need. We work with all volunteer groups up to, just I'm finishing a project with Appalachian Mountain Club, which has like 55,000 members and works in 14 states on the East Coast. So it is kind of all across the board. But it's always kind of got that, like, first we got to understand what's going on, then we got to make some decisions, then we got to find the right tool and create that, so that, because it's got to be actionable. Like, you don't want to work with any consultant who's not going to leave you with something that you can actually use to help you do the work. Who needs a plan on the shelf? I'm a little biased though, so.
But you're also really good at what you do. And I say that because I've actually worked with Karen. So, you know, not that I'm doing an official plug, but there are other organizations that do this, but I have known Karen and the team there at Conservation Impact for probably 15 years through, I think, the Land Trust Alliance. And so there are conferences that you go to where you experience a speaker who just kind of rocks your world, and Conservation Impact did that to me. I am going to ask the question, because we are kind of coming out of, you know, pandemic mode.
Yeah.
Do you do things in person? Do you do things on Zoom? How do you do this?
You know, we do it both. We had to learn on the fly, like everybody did, how to do our work virtually. there's pluses and minuses to each. People stay way more focused on Zoom because no one wants to stay on Zoom all day. So there's a lot less side chatter, but sometimes the conversations can be richer in person. So, we do whatever, whichever way the client does. More folks are going in person now. I was just at a planning meeting a couple of weekends ago. It's the first time that board had been together in 3 years in person. And it was really special to be there and kind of see them reconnect in that way. But everyone's got some people have boards all across the country, or California is a huge state. It can be really hard to get everybody together. So yeah, but it's every organization has their needs, and our job is to get people the tools they need as quickly as we can. Like, no one needs to do planning for 6 months. So if that means, hey, we're doing it by Zoom because it's faster and we can get it done faster. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, everyone we work with, their work is much more important than ours, so we need to be as accommodating as we can.
Well, I'm sure everyone appreciates that. So thank you, Karen. I'm going to encourage folks to continue to submit their questions in the Q&A for Karen and Shannon. And then as Juan proceeds in his presentation, Juan as well. So at this point, I'm going to hand the reins over to Juan Rosas, who's been instrumental in 30 by 30, not just locally, but statewide as well. And because of your extensive community engagement, you've just built incredible trust with the residents affiliated with your organization now. And so, Juan, take it away and tell us what you can about building trust in community.
First and foremost, thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm really excited to share with you all this experience that I've learned working with the immediate community, and I hope it's a big help. But before we get started, I really want you guys to give yourselves permissions to go back when you're 10 years old. Go back in time right now. Don't worry about your titles. Don't worry about your degrees, your education. Go back in time when you were 10 years old and you were stuck in wonder. I tell my kids all the time that I grew up, I'm a little older now, but I grew up in the best time when it came to wholesome television. Our wholesome television shows that I grew up taught me something. And honestly, now through all this experience and education that I've had, I still resort back to a lot of the teachings and a lot of the lessons that I learned that Saturday morning cartoon and serial time that I had as a kid. So I want you guys to reminisce with me and see what are the lessons that you learned if you grew up in the same generation that I did with these shows. For example, The Crocodile Hunter. He taught me how to love animals, and I'll always be very forever grateful for him and his teachings. Mr. Rogers, when it comes to community, he taught me to love all people, no matter the color of their skin, their gender, their race, their religion. He taught us to love everyone. Oh man, Reading Rainbow. Anybody remember that? I think that song's gonna get stuck in your head now. But he taught me how to love education, and he taught me how to love and to dream. And, growing up very poor, where, financial resources were very limited, getting lost in a good book made you dream and made you wonder. So I'm very proud to say that I grew up with television shows like him. But one of my favorites is Bob Ross, that he definitely taught me how to love the arts. I wish I had a afro like Mr. Ross, but his memory and obviously the pictures of that he drew of the landscapes is still very inspirational. And lastly, one of my favorites, and this might bring some good memories to everyone, is Captain Planet. And Captain Planet taught me how to love the earth and protect the earth and conserve the earth. If you grew up during this time, this childhood, your childhood was awesome. Your childhood was very awesome. And if you didn't, you have all rights to be jealous. But I want you to know that all the knowledge that I learned from these shows, I still apply to my work for 30 by 30. It's still honestly very important that we go back to the simplicity of those lessons that we learned as kids. want you guys to always remember when it comes to working with people, there's always going to be problems. It's unavoidable. There's always going to be times to agree to disagree, and there's going to be a lot of conflict. But always remember, that's why I want you guys to continue to remember that childhood wonder, where children, they didn't get focused on all these divisions of race, financial divisions, where they just play together, and once there's a common goal, they pursue it actively. So that is going to be our goal in this lesson, and I'll make it very quick, that I'm going to hit 3 major points to be able to start cultivating that trust and start working with communities that might not think like you, act like you, might not have the same interests as you, but together we can share one common goal on how we can continue to advance 30 by 30 here in California. Number 1, the art of cultivating trust and fostering community support. 2, effective leadership in guiding and championing the cause. And 3, the blueprint for equitable outdoor spaces and access for all. Let's get started. You know, the first one, the art of cultivating trust and fostering community. Most of the people on this call love conservation and are very familiar with its goals. They're very familiar with the language. So it's not going to be my job to teach you. If anything, I feel like I've been learning very much being a part of these webinars and learning from your experience and what you've been doing. But the art of cultivating trust and fostering community support is going outside the box. And you must learn to communicate conservation to those who might not know your language, might not know how to speak your language, might not even speak English in itself. You know, California is a melting pot of all these different generations, all these different cultures. So you must learn to think out of the box. So when it comes to conservation, we just had a big conservation 30 by 30 conference, and I loved it. I learned so much. But ultimately, when you're talking to the media community, remember, they might not know your language. And what is your ultimate goal? Is to conserve California, not just for your own interest or your organizational interest, but for the next generation and for those who might not even know what's going on or the importance of doing it. So this next slide has a little language in it, but I hopefully I don't offend anybody. But I love this post that it said, a cholo just came in and bought ocean bracelets and said, hey, those are those bracelets that save the ocean and shit? That's tight, dog. I'll take 2. That is our goal. If we're doing our work correctly, we are getting people that don't know how to speak your language, that don't know what conservation 30 by 30 is, that don't know policy, they don't know what land easements are, they don't know any of that stuff. So how can you right now say, you know what? I need to affect the cholo in East LA. I need to go after those people that might know what conservation is in Stockton, California. That has been my passion, is to get people, because you know what, regardless of where they grew up, regardless of their educational background, we all need healthy air to breathe. We all need healthy, clean water to drink, and we all need safe, clean public lands for our recreational uses. So I love the fact that if you need to start thinking out of the box, who are you impacting? Who's in your circle? Are you getting stuck with the same people that think like you, that have the same educational experience that you do, that go to the same beaches you go, that go to the same parks as you go? Have you been exploring the avenue and the opportunity that you might have the next deputy secretary, the next secretary, the next Wade amongst these kids, amongst these people that might not have no clue? But ultimately, that should be our goal. So how do we do that? You know, when it comes to trust, I encourage you to, that trust is a cornerstone of all successful conservation campaigns. Remember, it's not just about the environment, but it's also about the people who live in it. And sometimes we can get really stuck in the environment, and which is good, this is our passion. But ultimately, if we're going to make true change, we need to focus as equally as important those who live in it. When trust is established, people are more willing to collaborate. They're more willing to volunteer. I know Karen spoke about volunteering issues, and how can you organically get that spark? When you can get people really in love with the vision and you can go to them where they are and meet their needs where they are, they automatically start volunteering. You know, in most cases, we've done community work here at Hispanic Access Foundation. Most of the work is done by people that have no idea what conservation is. They don't have no idea what 30 by 30 is. So it's an ultimate goal for us to get those people in there. But one of the things you must work very hard, which I've seen many challenges working on a lot of the coalitions, is that you must be comfortable with yourself to be uncomfortable reaching people who are not like you, that don't think like you, they don't live where you live, and they didn't grow up where you did. You know, I know conservation can get very political as well, and I understand there's certain sides of the bipartisan, you know, spectrum that work better in conservation. But then I've been on calls where they're like very throwing like Republicans and conservatives under the bus. And I understand there's a lot of frustration, but remember, for conservation to really work, we need bipartisan support. We need to make sure that everyone is focused. And again, I know we all have different interests, but go back to that childhood on the playground where it didn't matter what your race was. It didn't matter how much money your parents made. It didn't matter who or what. All it mattered that you had an end goal to play well together and have fun. Conservation should be fun. Conservation should not be boring. It should be fun. There's nothing more important that we can do in our lifetime is to make sure California is passed on and that it's clean and healthy for all. So we must work with people that we might be uncomfortable with. We need to really get that synced in our head. You know, Jane Goodall, which was one of my favorites in conservation, and I know she's been a champion for many people. She once said that she was invited to a gala where a lot of the research scientists who were practicing on chimpanzees were there. And so she accepted that invitation. And when she went there, she received a lot of criticism from her side. And said, how dare you go to that gala where all these scientists who are experimenting on chimpanzees, you're their savior. What are you doing there? But when she shared her story and when she was able to share her heart on the importance of the chimpanzee, 2 research centers in the next 2 years shut down and they stopped practicing research on live chimpanzees. And she shared with this and said, if you're not willing to work with people who think opposite of you, you will never make honest impact. So right now, if you're a Democrat, you need to really start working with the Republicans. And if you're a Republican, you really need to start working with the Democrats. We need to start breaking those gaps and those silos and start saying, you know what, this is bigger than us, and we need to be uncomfortable. We need to be comfortable working with people that not be like us. We at Hispanic Access Foundation, just a small example, people always ask us, are we a religious organization? We are not. We are not a religious organization, but we work very closely with the faith communities because we never like going into a community and telling them what they need. We like to go to a community and listen to them. And when it comes to the Hispanic community, there might be a lot of challenges when it comes to government. There's a lot of challenges that comes to the immediate community, that Cholo and East LA that's buying those bracelets to save the ocean and shit. Those people might not trust government. So when we work very closely with government, like that sometimes shelters the community. So what we do, we like working with our faith leaders. Because, you know, they might not get very excited to work with their local mayors or their local state representatives, but they have trusted those faith leaders that have been doing their food banks in their communities. They've trusted their faith leaders because they've been doing their funeral services. They might not even attend their church or their mosque or whatever it may be, but ultimately they have trusted those leaders. And what do we want? We want to make sure that the immediate community has that trust so we can do work. So we have learned to use, when it comes to volunteering and building community support, who are those pillars? Who are those pillars in your immediate community that you can start using to start gathering support in your community? So that is something to think about. And a call to action is I encourage you to reflect on your work right now presently. How are you thinking outside of the box? How are you able to gain community trust? How are you going to be able to break those silos and start gathering trust and obviously start getting comfortable working with people that you normally don't work with? Number 2, effective leadership. Guiding and championing the cause. You know, what makes a leader effective in the realm of conservation? Well, obviously vision, passion, adaptability, the ability to inspire and mobilize others. But I want to again emphasize the importance of a leader's commitment to, as much knowledge you have, how can you take that knowledge and break it down where a 5-year-old can understand? Because if you're going to inspire the next generation, if we're talking about 30 by 30, which then will lead maybe 50 by 50 in the future, who knows? We need to start getting young now. It's not yet like, oh, maybe in the next 3 years or when 30 by, no, now. How can we get younger now? Well, so ultimately, how are we going to be able to gather the knowledge, all that experience, all that education, all that you have learned? How can you now chew it down where a 5-year-old can understand? So I think that's where your leadership skills are going to start refining and being developed, is ultimately, how can I do this where everything that I've learned so far, I can break it down where a 5-year-old can understand. So I'm going to invite you to take that leadership journey and start thinking that way. How can I start breaking down these? I must admit, even when I started entering the conservation field, because this wasn't where I changed careers and ultimately into this space, I felt that when I first joined, I had no idea what was going on. And ultimately, again, we need to be sensitive in learning. I'm not saying dumb down what you've learned, but I'm saying the exact opposite. What have you learned, and how can I now teach my 5-year-old to get inspired into conservation? And lastly, the blueprint for equitable outdoor spaces for all, which is one of my favorite points, and I end with this. I recently went to Venice Beach over the summer, and I just sat and observed. And I love just people. And when I was at Venice Beach, and many of you probably have been to Venice Beach and know what I'm talking about, that is literally the melting pot of California. I mean, the wealthy and the poor, all different cultures, all different genders, all different spectrums, everything and everyone is there. Some are surfing, some are skateboarding, some are just under a blanket doing drugs. I mean, let's get real. It is a crazy, weird, I'm saying it sensitive, like a circus of all different emotions and people. But that's what I love about California, is that's the beauty. That's what we need to gather strengths. And I want you to look in at this picture that everyone has a different perspective on what conservation is. But ultimately, in everyone's different perspectives, everyone needs it. Everyone needs it. And ultimately, how are you working very closely? Because again, we can get very specific on what we're doing. Some are protecting the ocean, some are protecting the lands, some are going after policy and land easements and all these things. But ultimately, how can you say, in my work, what am I presently doing and what's missing? Who is missing? Who's missing in my circle that can make immediate change? You know, as we're fighting hard to protect our landscapes like Malakloyak in NorCal, Chuckwalla Deserts in SoCal, Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary in the Central Coast, you know, the mountain lions and the coyotes and the chuckwallas and all these animals, they don't have the ability to go to the local city call and say, hey, my environment's being impacted, what can I do? That's where we all come into place, right? But ultimately, how are we going to be able to get the community involved? Can you really start thinking very deeply? Who's missing at your table? Who's missing at your coalition? Are the veterans missing? You know, they fought hard for our land, for the land of the free, home of the brave. So they deserve equitable access to the great outdoors. Are your disabled people missing? You know, it breaks my heart. One of my close family members is in a wheelchair. And when we go to the beach, it's very hard to get her to put her toes in the sand and put her toes in the water. You know, are we missing community leaders that are from the disabled community that could be advocating hard for those wheelchair ramps that go all the way to the water? You know, who's missing? Is culture, is there a different culture, maybe a different language barrier that we can invite to those coalitions? Are the faith communities missing? Is the LGBTQ communities missing? Who is missing? Because when I go to Venice Beach, it's the picture of California. And when you look at that picture, you need to say, okay, we need them at our table. We need these people because they're going to bring a different voice. And ultimately, again, advance our end goals to conserve 30 by 30. So once again, thank you for your time. And I will just end with this. I'll tell Wade Crowfoot all the time that cholo in East LA, that cholo that is saving the ocean by buying those bracelets is going to go after his job one of these days. And I think if we do our jobs right, that should be the end goal. Inspiring the next generation and inspiring people that had no clue on what conservation was. And then you're going to see these environmental giants. Thank you for your time. Y Dios los bendiga.
That was amazing, Juan. Thank you. Incredibly inspirational, and I can see why you've been so successful. You have found your passion. So I want to jump back to your topic of speaking the same language. And while you could take that literally as Spanish versus English, you can also take it figuratively. And I'll use a personal example. I've been involved with transportation mitigation. I did not speak transportation 20 years ago, and the transportation agency did not speak conservation. So the question ultimately is, what strategies, routes, tools have you found successful to bridging that either literal or figurative language barrier?
I think listening more. You know, I just sitting quietly and listening to people again that don't speak your language. And again, thank you for elevating that. I do say it figuratively. People that don't know your lingo, that don't know your conservation policies. But you know, one group that I missed is our Native Americans. You know, we can learn so much from them. I remember we ran into a certain issue on a certain project that we're working here with Southern California, and so there were some Native American leaders that we at Hispanic Access met with them. And we went to lunch with them, and they're like, and so we just sounded like, you know what? He goes, we get a misrepresentation. We care about conservation. If anything, you don't realize there's tribal knowledge that we have that most of you don't. And we had, in this particular coalition, there was no tribal representation. And then so they were telling me, like, you know what, there's certain areas that might not be on reservation land, but they're still very sacred to us. So when we're seeing these original maps on what you're trying to do, we don't want a trail that's going to go right through our sacred site that we have kept sacred, that only our tribal leaders go to. There's people on our reservation that's never been there because that certain area is a place of prayer and a place of spiritual connection just for tribal leaders. So bringing back to your conversation, that's why it's important to listen. It's important to also get everyone involved, because there's certain information we don't know because we get caught up very much on what we're trying to do. And then we assume everyone's going to want that. But if we just, I maybe say it very politely, but if we just shut up and listen, we will start learning their language.
Excellent point yet again. A follow-up to that is asking the question of who's at the table. How do you do a survey of who might be missing? Like, if you don't know what you don't know, how do you know who's missing?
Oh, that's a great question. And the way we do it again is we always love using the leadership. Who is the key players in that community? Who is that key player in the region? And I'm not excluding local leaders, elected leaders, but also, again, that's why it's important to even work, even if you're an atheist, it's also good to work with the theist communities. You know, put your bipartisan, put all your and just say, hey, we're going to work together, because ultimately those leaders that are in that immediate community are the ones that are going to know who's missing. And ultimately, that's been the strategy that we've used here at Hispanic Access, and it's been very effective to be able to go in there and say, hey, who is our key players? Who is our community shakers? And honestly, again, I didn't get this physique not avoiding a lot of lunches, but one of the best places that I love to do is honestly just going and breaking bread with people. How important it is to break bread with someone. And ultimately, once you get a un pan mexicano con un café in them, they start telling you what we need and who is missing at those tables.
So now I have to do a side story since you brought up food. Since Juan was the co-facilitator of the partnership coordinating committee, every time we would, introduce ourselves, we would have to answer some question. And it almost always was about food, like what's your favorite pie or what's your favorite autumn soup? And so I think that breaking bread concept ties into so many different realms, and it's so human, right? We all need to eat. So thank you for bringing that up. I want to ask a question specifically about, working with folks that are on opposing sides. And you specifically mentioned Democrats and Republicans, but it could be anything, right? It could be environmentalists and home builders. It could be landowners and land trusts. And how do you build trust with somebody you have no rapport with? I wouldn't necessarily be able to pick up the phone and ask the head of the BIA to go out to lunch with me. They may act suspicious about that. And so what's a good first step?
With this, I feel that the easiest way that we've overcome challenges is always focusing on the common ground. It is very easy to get caught up on what we don't agree. But when we focus on what we do agree, and when it comes to conservation, it's easy. We all, no matter if they're rich or poor, if they're gay or straight, they're atheist or they're theist, we all need healthy air to breathe. We all need clean, safe drinking water to drink. We all need safe, clean public lands for our recreation, for our emotional, physical, and mental health. So we always focus on those three areas. And when ultimately we are working with people that we really don't agree, again, we always really focus on what can we agree? Because ultimately, again, going back to that childhood playing on the playground, what is the common ground that we can look for? What are the things that we can get along with? And let's play there and let's use that. Going back to food, I mean, again, that's my favorite subject, but ultimately, I remember that when we were invited to the Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary Morro Rock, Reunite the Rock Rally. One of my favorite moments was seeing the Hispanic community and the Chumash community breaking bread and having lunch together. And ultimately, if there has been, and I remember at that specific rally, just seeing all these different backgrounds, all these different professions, all these different agreeing and disagreeing, all sitting at the table, finding one common ground, and it's protecting that ocean and coast. So ultimately, again, focusing on what we agree. It's easy to focus on what we don't agree, but I think it's a challenge, and it takes leadership skill, and it takes maturity. It also takes you swallowing sometimes your pride and working with people who might not agree. And if we really try hard, we might learn a thing or two that is going to make us even better as a human being personally.
All great points. And I just want to say, kind of coming full circle with the entire webinar, we started with the broad at WCB and kind of like the big picture. And then we moved to kind of the organizational level, and then we moved to the human level. And I do want to thank all of my speakers. I'm going to wrap up the slides, and then we'll do more Q&A with the audience. So I'll encourage everyone to put their questions for the presenters in the Q&A, and we can get to those as we wrap things up. So thank you again to the three wonderful presenters. We appreciate your willingness to participate here today. And I already mentioned questions, so we'll focus on those in just a minute. This is the 7th workshop in an 8-part series. So our last workshop is November 30th, and that's a Thursday from 10 to 11:30. And we're going to feature content related to 30 by 30 and actually focus on the last 3 pathways that we haven't covered, which are 2, 8, and 9. So if you're able to, take out your phone and scan the QR code with the camera, click on the link to register for the event, and it will be added to the chat. And you're also going to be excited to hear about some of our speakers. We have the Los Angeles Neighborhood Land Trust, Resources Legacy Fund, and then the tribal biologist from the Gabrielino Band of Mission Indians Quiche Nation, who's also started a nonprofit called LINKS, L-I-N-K-S, which stands for Laboratory for Indigenous Knowledge Systems. So we hope to see you there at that event. And if you want to stay informed about future workshops with FHBP, this next one in November, email community@fhbp.org and include your name and email, and we will add you to our list. As long as you're expressing your permission, we will add you. We don't add you if you don't want to be on it. But then also you can stay informed through the state through their 30 by 30 email list. So you can sign up with the links here for the California Natural Resource Agency 30 by 30 email list. And that email subscription gives you access to information on webinars, grants, programs that are being developed, public comment periods, etc. So at this point, I'm going to say thank you for joining us today, but stay tuned for some questions here. And now that I have everybody on my screen, I know that we've got a question starting with Shannon, specifically about WCB. Who are there geographies that people contact a specific, this person handles the Central Coast, or this person handles the desert at WCB, or is it just a mishmash? So who's the best person to contact?
That's a great question. I would contact the supervisors, and on our webpage under About Us, you can find the supervisor contact information. So like on the restoration and development, we're not divided by geographies, we're divided by programs. But the acquisitions, they tend to be a bit more geographic in the way that they deal with their staff. So I would contact the supervisors.
Okay, great. And you said that was also on the WCB website.
Yeah, I can put it in the chat if you like.
Perfect. And then Gio can move it over to the audience chat. Well, perfect. So Karen, let's move over to you and chat about process. So how long does it take to, figure out organizational capacity? Is this something you can do in a week, a month? Is it a 6-month process? What do people need to expect?
Well, I think if you're in the context of our discussion today, if you were looking at applying for a funding opportunity, say with Shannon or some other agency, then, as part of, I would look at it as kind of part of your decision-making process. If that is the best fit for you, you don't have to do, especially I would sort of think through, I would do a quick kind of down and dirty, like, does it really fit in? Is it taking us towards our overall goals and mission, or is it just distraction? Sort of evaluate how it's going to affect you there. And then I would look at the capacity it would really take to do it, because as we know, there's never enough overhead or squishy money in grants. So don't shortchange. Don't say, oh, I'm sure we can find someone to take that job for something under the market, right? So, the extent to which you need to do some research and that sort of thing that's probably going to be your biggest variable. But you can sit down with whoever your leadership team is, whether that's a group of volunteers or your board or your staff team, and do that first part. Like, does it really fit in, or is it a distraction? And if so, it helps us, here's how it fits into kind of our overall system. You could do that like in an hour or two, as long as you had a really clear understanding of your own goals and the goals of the grant program that you're applying to.
Excellent. Thank you for clarifying the time frame. And I do want to do a follow-up question to that. California has a new law in place that makes it a little bit more challenging to use contractors. And so some organizations are now having to transition contractors to employees. Has that been part of the discussion in terms of organizational growth and the appropriateness of an employee role versus a contractor role and capacity?
That stuff does vary by state, so it's hard for me to track because we work in a lot of different places. For a long time there, when when you could be more choosy. I saw a trend of people sort of putting people like on a 90-day contract so that you could, if it didn't work out, you had an out for everybody. And there's pluses and minuses to that. And one of those big important minuses is it can, not give workers protections, or put them in difficult positions. So, in light of that, there's an adage that I heard from a 70-year-old board member once, and it was hire smart or manage hard. And so I would say the way to, if okay, we can't use a contractor anymore, we've got to do this, and take your time and don't settle. I mean, it is hard to hire, but if you want to do big things, or gosh, especially if you're talking about the work that Juan's talking about, you need you got to have the right person with the right skill set, the right mindset, kind of the confidence to do the work. So it's better to, I mean, even though you just want to get it filled, time on the front end saves you on the back end.
That's right. And it's funny that you say that. I was chatting with my dad earlier this week, and he's been a CEO, most of his life, in charge of multi-million-dollar companies. And he said the hardest thing is always managing the people. And so your words are wise.
Yeah. It's also the thing that we put people in the position to do and don't give them any skills in. So if, as you grow your capacity, people are going to become new supervisors, please send them somewhere to learn some skills. Give them something, because it's not fair to them and it's not fair to the thing. And people want good working environments, and they deserve that. And that's something we just sort of assume comes naturally. And the fact is, it's hard to do this. So if you have any professional development dollars and you're going to be turning someone to a manager, spend them on that person.
Another pro tip from Karen. Thank you. We'll move over to Juan, and I want to ask you, is there a community that I think took you by surprise in terms of having this relationship built now has just made your work around the environment, recreation, and healthy foods and clean water so much easier?
Yeah, that's a great point. Definitely in my personal work here in the valley that I lived, I've always worked very hard. I was leading a youth organization, and getting them to the great outdoors was very important. And so one of our local immediate political leaders here was just super conservative and very against environmental work. And so being able to break bread with that particular person, to be honest with you, has become one of my personal friends. And not only that, has been a champion that's actually gone against a lot of their own, even their political party. And I know the importance, again, to be able to, just to backstory very quick, when we first met, it was so uncomfortable and it was so awkward. So to be able to not start off guns blazing, but to be able to go and just listen, and start asking questions, and start asking the importance, you know what, no one's going to go against saying, hey, I'm against clean air. I'm against, having safe public lands for recreation. I'm against that. No one that's has common sense is going to go against that. So again, always leverage what your strengths, who you are, and also know when to be quiet and listen to the hearts. And then see from their perspective. Again, it's always that saying, if you walk in someone's shoes, you might understand their journey. And so that, again, it might be tough to say, hey, I have to put the shoes on someone who I guess we could say is even my enemy. But ultimately, that's when we really start learning from each other, and you start seeing positive work moving forward.
I'm going to follow up on that, because I think it's a really important point. And I'll use a personal example. I have a girlfriend in the housing arena who you would think that we're just not going to communicate, because they want to put houses everywhere, and I want them centered in a particular, urban area as opposed to the wildlands. And I listened to a workshop webinar that she had done, and she actually said, I have this friend named Melanie who taught me about not building in the wildland areas. And so your ability to communicate your position without that struggle and that awkwardness, I think just speaks volumes to what we could get done if we actually decided to move that common ground together forward, rather than constantly battling one another. So your point is really well taken. I do want to hop back. So I guess I don't have another question. Sorry, Juan. I guess I had a statement since it was open mic night at the Improv. I'm going to move back over to Shannon. We have a question specifically about what determines whether or not a project is worthy of WCB's time. Like, how does that get figured out?
Well, we do have scoring criteria that we use when we evaluate full proposals. They're all worthy. It's I think it depends again on the geography. Is it in an area where we want to make more of an impact? For example, historically, WCB hasn't done a lot of Southern California projects, so we're trying to, place those at a higher priority. Or how does the particular project rank in terms of the surrounding habitat and the surrounding resources? It's we're statewide, so it's really variable. But we do have scoring criteria that we use to evaluate our projects, and if they score up to a certain point, then we generally recommend them for funding. So, and those scoring criteria take into account all of those factors that I was mentioning as well.
Okay, great. And that actually kind of leads into another question, this one from Grace, about will there be an ongoing list of organizations and people that have received grant funding and starting projects? I feel like that could point to your annual report or your agendas, but what resources does the public have?
That's a great question. Well, everything's always in our full agendas, but that can be, hard to sift through. I'll have to look and see if our annual report lists that. And if it doesn't, that's actually a good idea. That would be something that we should do. So thank you for that.
Affecting change already in a workshop in SoCal. I love it. Well, I'm aware of the time and I like to be punctual. So I'm going to thank everyone for participating today, for joining us on the webinar. Please fill out the survey that Zoom sends to you so that we have a better understanding of what we can do better, what we did well today. And we also will be sending it via email so that you can follow up in case the Zoom platform doesn't actually automate that particular email. But thank you all, and I hope to see you in November. Thanks again to my speakers for today. You are all great.
Thank you, Melanie, for putting this on. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.